We have a mutual friend, Marlena. She sent me a Now This video that you were in where you're explaining your advocacy for sex work. We're talking about all kinds of sex work here, right? We're talking about the oldest profession in the world. We're talking about prostitution
Right.
as well, right? So walk us through the reason for that. And thank you for coming on, man.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, thank you for being willing to have the conversation. Up until very recently, people didn't even really like recognize the humanity of sex workers. It didn't even like really invest in thinking about how they could have better outcomes, like how they could succeed better, how they can be safer. So just like you being willing to have this conversation is something that I truly appreciate. So as far as like my involvement with the movement, it's really twofold. I'm a former sex worker. I've done full service sex work. I've been a go-go dancer. I've done other things within the industry. And then a lot of the people that I love have done it or do it as well. And when you think about the decriminalization of sex work, the people that I'm talking about are like the most marginalized folks. You're talking about Black and brown cis women. You're talking about members of the transgender and gender nonconforming community. You're talking about, you know, like runaway homeless youth, LGBTQ runaway kids, and kids that are often kicked out of their homes because of non-acceptance from their parents. They're about 7 to 8 times more likely than their counterparts to trade sex. And you're talking about people that are the easiest targets for police. Just this week, a ProPublica article came out about the NYPD Vice Squad, infamous unit of 96 officers within the NYPD that are supposed to deal with crimes of public morality,
Right.
so prostitution, gambling, drugs, stuff like that. But in reality, if you read this report, it's about how they weaponize their badges to target sex workers. There's an officer that said, "This is the best job in the world. You get overtime, you get a hand job, and you get a beer, and then you don't even have to pay for it." He said that on the record.
Yeah.
So imagine like what these folks are doing when they
And
don't.
the Vice Squad's notorious for just basically being a way of cracking down on poor communities and vulnerable communities. There's no squad at the NYPD to go crack down what's going on at Wall Street.
Yeah, and like they say that Vice goes after traffickers. It doesn't go. And there's a big difference between a sex worker and someone who's trafficked. No one should be trafficked.
Right.
Vice doesn't really spend a lot of time going after people that are trafficked. Vice doesn't go after the Jeffrey Epsteins of the world. They go after people that look like my clients when I was a public defender. So like that's one end of it, of why I believe in decrim so deeply, is to really liberate sex workers from over policing. And by that I mean the most marginalized sex workers. When I was a sex worker in law school, I knew other people that were sex workers too. But because we were in law school, it was okay.
That must have been tough. You're just trying to pay your way through law school. There's people who take jobs, working the fry machine at McDonald's, and they're embarrassed of that. Is you're thinking, well, I need to do this because it's work. Like you said in that video, sex work is work. So, I mean, did you get any pushback? Did your family and friends know? What was their responses to that?
I've been on dates, and people are like, "Oh, you done that? I don't want to touch you." Like,
oh, really?
You're a sex worker? Yeah. Like, there's this idea that like sex workers are somehow dirty or whatever else. But like, I've had a lot of jobs in my life. I've done sex work multiple times in my life. Most of those times have not been as privileged as law school. Like, it's work.
You're talking about legalizing sex work, decriminalizing. What's the nuance there between decriminalization and legalization?
Nevada has legalization. The problem with legalization is that, in parts of Nevada, is that it creates barriers to like for people that are the most marginalized. So like maybe trans folks that don't have the proper ID, maybe immigrants that are non-citizens. There's just like barriers, and there's government regulation around it. Versus decrim just says, hey, like police, don't arrest people on either side of this transaction, and then the communities can come around and find ways to support each other, and hopefully there should be some state funding as far as like, for services for sex workers too. But ultimately, it's not saying these are the barriers. It's not like Nevada where you can only do it in certain areas, and sometimes that means that you have to like live there, which like leads to trafficking.
Right.
Decrim just says, hey, police, like my body, my choice.
You would be opposed to something that's like in Amsterdam where there's government employees, sex workers. The argument there that, we don't need government regulation. You don't trust the government to regulate this property. So don't legalize it, just decriminalize it?
Sort of. I want to be really intentional about the difference between sex work and trafficking. With decrim, every single trafficking statute is still on the books. all the decrim groups, like we're all also like incredibly like emphatically anti-trafficking.
Right.
What it is it's saying, you know, like don't put regulations on people that will lead to barriers to being able to do the work legally. Which is different than legalization. There's very few decrim models. New Zealand has one of them. One of the problems with like New Zealand and then also a lot of other places that have decrim model or that places that have legalization models is that like immigrants in particular. I'm talking around because I don't remember the name of the country at the moment because it's Friday. I'm tired. But like, there's some European countries that have done a legalization model where you know like there's you know they're fine for some people, but other people they leave them out. The most marginalized folks are left out, and because of that, like if you're still making any part of the profession operate in this, under the shadows because they can't meet the standards to be part of that legalization, then you're not any better than what we have now.
You keep having to make this distinction that you're not for traffickers because it's the same thing with drugs, right? Like, 'cause I'm for decriminalizing all drugs, and then people would make the facetious argument like, "Oh, are you for the narcos? Are you for the drug traffickers?" No, they're bad people. They're doing terrible things.
Exactly.
That's not the same as the product, the actual substance.
Exactly. I mean, labor trafficking is a really big deal, and it's kind of unfortunate that the people that take to Twitter to call me a trafficker every now and then, and daily, frankly, it's unfortunate they don't care about labor trafficking too,
Right.
because it's like they say they want to abolish slavery and like sex slavery. Like if you're being labor trafficked, that's terrible too. But we didn't outlaw work. Why do we think we can outlaw the oldest profession in the world and have better outcomes? Prohibition doesn't work.
I was just talking about this the other day that, and it's related, yeah, obviously. Porn stars, right? Porn stars are the most famous people in society, but nobody talks about them. We all know their names, right? We know that we see them more than we see like celebrities on Instagram, right? If you
Right.
watch porn regularly, but nobody talks about them. It's like
Mhm.
this thing that, and again, it's the oldest profession in the book. Sex, everybody does it. My own evolution on it. I as a child, I was taught the whole puritanical thing that I was Catholic,
Mm.
so sex is dirty.
Right.
Period. Right. And so
Right.
selling yourself for sex or a lap dance or anything sexual is dirty, sinful. But then it's like I remember being very maybe in my teens and somebody said something very simple like, if having sex for free is okay, right? If you're doing it for fun is okay, why can't you just sell it?
I'd say like the biggest opponents to decrim, it's not even the people that are coming at this from like a moralistic standpoint. It's not. It's the people that believe in what's called the Nordic model. Well, they call it the Nordic model. I call it prohibition because that's what it is. In demand model, the equality model, it's all the same thing. It's all a prohibitionist framework. And like, so what their framework assumes is that everyone is a trafficking survivor. Everyone is trafficked, that people don't have any agency. And the way that you end trafficking, because they think that everything is trafficking, is to make the entire sex trade illegal. It's the same thing as the people that said, hey, in 1921, hey, like alcohol's creating problems for society. So if we make it illegal, it'll go away.
Right.
It's the same thing as like drug prohibition. They're prohibitionists. That is their model. That is their framework. And so like really that's their biggest argument is that everyone's a trafficking survivor. So the arguments against that are like put people in front of them, put women, put queer folks, put some straight men, put non-binary folks in front of them that say, hey, no, like I did sex work for a mixture of between like circumstance and choice. I was broke, I needed the money, was lacking access to housing, or you know, this is a job that I want to do.
Right.
Most people do sex work that do sex work, not trafficking, somewhere in that area. You'll also notice that like the prohibitionist folks, they do very little, or they talk very little about fixing the structural programs that like would prevent people from having to do sex work in the first place.
We don't have these conversations ever. And if you do read about them, you're getting it from a media company that has a corporate agenda that's not really going to give you all the details. They're going to just report it as this, oh, look at this exotic agenda that somebody has. No, but this is, again,
Right.
the oldest profession in the world. How many people are occupied in it daily around the world? And we need to talk about it. We need to bring it out of the shadows.